Hello my lovely Misfitians and welcome back to another video. My name is Carrie and I am your watercolor misfit. So today we're going to be painting a very simple, very easy ladybug. So I know that this looks very complicated, especially if you're a beginner. It looks a lot of times overwhelming, but it really isn't. I used to do this actually these types of paintings with students between second grade to, I think the oldest that I had was seventh grade. And they honestly loved doing these types of exercises where basically you're working shape by shape by shape. So if you're new to watercolor, this is a perfect tutorial for you to kind of play around with. The only things that you're really going to need to learn how to do is glaze, as well as do variegated washes and flat washes and gradient washes. Those are really the only things that you need to know before doing this, as well as kind of mixing your colors on a watercolor palette, getting them the right consistency and stuff like that. But other than that, this is a very easy tutorial for you to just play around with and have fun. So what do you actually need for this particular tutorial? So the last time in a video, we talked about core gradient colors and then adding contrasting colors, and that is where this chart comes into play. You can actually use any colors that you want to for this particular ladybug. It does not matter. So you can use the colors that I'm using, or you can use your own. The main thing is you want to explore and play around with those colors, and that's what the purpose of this chart was for. So if you have not watched that yet, you might want to watch the basically how to create this particular chart and really explore with your colors and figure out what we're doing. This is basically the exploring part of your watercolor, and then this particular tutorial is putting what we learned from this chart into action. So my core colors for this particular illustration is going to be Opera Rose, Permanent Rose, Windsor Orange, and Cadmium Yellow. The three contrasting colors that I'm going to be adding to this illustration is Green Gold, Mauve, as well as Manganese Blue. And the drop colors that I'm going to be adding, either dropping in or glazing on top, will be Windsor Violet. So those are the paint colors that I am using. The extra supplies that I used is I used a very opaque white watercolor. You can also use white gouache. It doesn't really matter. You can use white ink, whatever you have on hand that's super opaque and basically can help you fix mistakes or add little patterns and textures. That's what we're going to be using that for. I also will be using a Da Vinci mop brush is what they call it. And that is this one right here. I really like this one. It's made of squirrel's hair. It holds a lot of paint and a lot of water at one time. So it is really easy to do washes if you're interested in that. These can be quite pricey. So if you don't want to invest in that, and that is perfectly fine, the Silver Black Velvet line has an awesome round brush that pretty much does the same thing. So if you have this, Winsor & Newton Cotman series also has really nice round brushes, as well as Princeton for student grade brushes. But basically you just want a large round brush that can hold a lot of paint and a lot of water. The other brushes that I have on hand is my Black Velvet Silver size 8, Black Silver size 4, I have a Cotman size 00. So this itty bitty one is for dots and patterns. Another thing that you probably will need is a light table if you are intimidated by drawing. I will provide inside of Watercolor Misfit Land this particular drawing. It's a very rough sketch that I have basically blown up, and you can actually transfer this onto watercolor paper, or you can draw it yourself. But this basically is if you want to transfer it to watercolor paper, or if you want to basically look back. You'll see in the tutorial, I look back and kind of figure out where my spots are, because I lost my spots on this ladybug while I was painting. So that's another thing that you can do. The light table that I have is called Crafty Mint, and I got it from Amazon, and I got it super cheap like 2 years ago. I have no idea what the price is now. Basically, just look for a very inexpensive, cheap light table on Amazon that has really good ratings. Make sure that it has a lot of people commenting and saying, yeah, I really like this. And that should be able to help you find something that is inexpensive that still works well. Another thing you're going to need for this particular painting is an X-Acto knife. We're going to be doing a texture with this. And if you need to pick up any unwanted like blossoms or blooms, Q-tips are always nice to have on hand. Another thing that you're going to want is a mixing surface as well as water, which is over here off screen, which you can't really see. And yeah. Oh, I almost forgot. And also colored pencils. You can use your own colored pencils. The kind that I personally have really started to fall in love with are these Posca pencils. So if you're interested in buying some really nice colored pencils, this particular set is really, really nice. It gives you pretty much all the colors that you would ever want. Now with all of that covered, let's go ahead and jump into the actual tutorial. Now, I haven't been painting for a while because I've been a new mom and I've been really, really busy. So I've been doing like little things here and there. But one thing I will say, if you have been out of the painting practice or you're a beginner and new, bugs are actually a really good starting place to work off of. A lot of them have these section parts, which actually work really well with watercolor because we'll work in sections. And that's the reason why I chose a ladybug today, because I want to warm myself up before I start painting a larger illustration that I have planned. So let's go ahead and begin. The very first thing that I'm going to be doing is using a Da Vinci mop brush. I really like this one when laying down very first washes, especially when I have to do larger areas. However, if you don't have this particular brush, just use your largest round brush that you feel comfortable using. The next thing that I'm going to do is determine where I want my light source to be. So a lot of times I like my light source to be on this side of the painting. So for our shell, we're going to make this little side right here lighter colors. So that means we'll want more of our cadmium yellow in this particular area and maybe even some of our green gold. And we will also want probably a little bit of maybe reflection in this particular area. Let me use my paintbrush so you can see it better. In this particular area, because usually you have a bounce off of light coming from the table. So I want to determine where my light sources are. And up here, since I'm going to be glazing up here on top of this, I just want this particular section to be my basic colors. So I've already done a little glazing chart, and basically I laid down all my colors to figure out which ones I wanted to glaze on top to make my head. So for this particular illustration, the ones that I really like are the Opera Rose and let's see, maybe some of my Permanent Rose and Windsor Orange. So really no yellows, it looks like. Maybe a little bit of yellow over here for my highlight because I am planning on glazing over that with Windsor Violet. So I want to have nice deep purple tones, and then maybe in the lighter areas, if I glaze over a yellow with my Windsor Violet, it will turn more into a neutral brown. So that's just something to keep in mind. So let's go ahead and work in sections. If that didn't make sense to you, it's not that big of a deal. It will make sense as we start working through this because this is actually a really easy illustration. And here's another tip for you. I am right-handed, so I am going to start on this side of the illustration and go this way so that I make sure that I'm not putting my hand, let's say if I started this side and then I wanted to paint here, I might perchance put my hand on this particular side and pick up some of that paint. I want to leave that wash once it's painted and let it dry thoroughly. So the best way to do that is to paint, for me, left to right. If you are left-handed, the best thing for you to do would be to switch hands, of course, and paint right to left. So you're not ever laying your hand in a previous wash. So let's go ahead and begin. I already have a lot of Opera Rose laid down from last time from doing swatches. So I'm going to go ahead and wet this. The next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and add my permanent rose to my plate. My Windsor orange. And remember, if you do not have these colors, you can always mix them or use colors that are comparable in your particular palette. Okay, so these are the colors that I'm going to go ahead and lay out. I'm most likely going to be picking up more of these, but I like to have a couple of these colors on my mixing plate so that if I need to mix a color in, I can get it very quickly. And let's go ahead and start with this particular shape right here, the left side of our shell. All right, I'm going to start on this particular side and start with my darker colors. So I'm going to start with a permanent rose. And as you can see, I've already mixed a little bit of my Windsor orange and then my Windsor orange with Opera Rose as well. So I've already kind of primed that and prepped that. What I'm going to do is just start on this particular side. And just start painting in my colors. And basically I'm going to do a variegated wash. This is one thing that I really like playing around with. This is what I think watercolor is really so great about, is just playing around with mixtures and allowing them to kind of just bloom and blossom out the way they want to. Right. And add this one down. And I'm going to clean out my brush. We're going to pick up some of this yellow and drop some of that on this particular side. And since yellow, this cadmium yellow, is a very opaque color, it will actually push, like a bully, my other colors around. You can already kind of see it's pushing these away. I'm going to add just a little bit of Windsor orange next to it. And then I'm going to take some of my permanent rose and add that back in as well. let's take some Opera Rose and go ahead and go back over this because I really want this shell to pop that pink color. And that is our first shell done. We're going to go ahead and let that completely dry. I really like this. One thing that you can overdo when you're a beginner is overwork your patterns. So once you kind of get an idea of what you like, even though I have a little bit of spindlies here, which I prefer not to have, I want to leave this alone. It's very easy to overwork your paper or also overwork your paints, and then you lose that really cool tie-dye effect that watercolor is actually known for. So we're going to let this completely dry before we move on to this particular shell. Okay, so now that we've gotten this side done, let's go ahead and let that completely dry. Here's another really quick tip for you. How do you know your paper is actually dry? Well, one way that you can tell is actually by placing your back of your fingers on the paper. And if it is dry, it will feel basically room temperature to the touch. However, if it's not, it might feel a little bit cool or a little bit damp. And the reason why we're not taking our fingers and going straight down is because oil on your fingers can actually attach to the paper and cause a little bit of an oil resist when we're working with watercolor. So you want to make sure that you're tapping with the back of your paper. Now, always remember that your paint is going to dry faster than your actual paper will. So right now, it actually looks like my paint is dry on this particular side, but it's not. The paper is actually still very, very wet. So you can actually see I picked up a little bit of the paint because even though it looks like it's dry, the paper is actually still wet. So remember when we're painting on watercolor paper, especially if you are using 100% cotton watercolor paper or an artist grade watercolor paper, it's going to take longer to dry, almost like a cloth would. So always remember that your paint is going to dry faster than your paper. So that's kind of one thing that you need to be checking out and making sure that both are dry before we move on, or else you're going to get blossoms and blooms in these shapes, and we don't want that. We want these to be nice, solid, variegated washes over our beetle's wings. Okay, so currently we've just been working with the core gradient. However, I want to add some spice or diversity into my watercolor painting. This particular side is still not completely dry, but this one is. So what I want to do is take a clean brush. I'm going to be taking a round brush size 8, but you can use whatever round brush that you want. And I want to pick up some green gold and just add a little bit of this on the edge, right where my yellow was. So basically I'm glazing over, and then what I'm going to do is slowly soften this edge by just taking clean water and pulling it over. Just like so. It's very, very subtle. but basically I just want to add little bits now. And since this is wet with clean water, I'm just going to drop in some paint in different locations. Just to add a little bit of variety in my painting. Okay, my son is awake, so if you hear him in the background, he's in the playpen behind me. So if you hear little grunts or shouts, that is my son. But since both of our little shells are done, they're completely dry, and also the paper is completely dry. The next thing that I want to do is go ahead and paint the other areas with the same colors. It's not going to make sense at first, but I'm going to paint them with the same colors that I did for the shells. And then eventually what we're going to do is glaze over top of those to create the darker black colors. And I think for this too, I'm going to add some of my mauve in when I was doing my contrasting colors to this particular color combination, just to make things a little darker. Now I'm going to add some opera rose. And then let's add a little bit of yellow. Eh? No. I had a little bit of a mistake right here where it bled out. Basically, my brush got water on the paper, so I lifted a little bit of that to try and lift it up. I'm not too worried about it. I can correct that a little bit more with white gouache paint later. So if that happens to you, don't really worry about it. Just keep kind of going. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is his little legs. I'm going to take some mauve mixed in with some of this permanent rose. And I'm using a size 4 round brush. And just going to paint these little guys in just like so, with basically a solid flat wash of purple. And you know what? To spice it up a little bit, I'm going to take some of my manganese blue and just drop some of that towards the end of his little legs. Okay, so the next thing I want to do actually is take this blue manganese that's mixed a little bit with this mauve. And I want to paint this little area right in the middle here. This little triangle. And I also want to do his little antenna up here. That lighter blue color. And then finally I'm going to add that lighter blue in this area. And that is all of our basic layers done. So the next thing I want to do is make sure this completely dries, all of it, because I'm going to be doing some scoring next, and I want to make sure that the paper is completely dry before I do that, because I don't want to ruin the paper. Okay, you do not have to do this particular step. You can do this with pencils if you want to, but I wanted to add and play around with adding different textures. So what I'm going to do is use an X-Acto knife, and I'm going to lightly, what we call, score the paper. So right where I put those little lines with my pencil, I'm going to slowly go over it very lightly with my X-Acto knife. And I'm going to do a cross-hatching effect. And what's going to end up happening is the pigment, when I paint over this, is going to basically fall into these lines and make a texture in my painting. And also what I'm doing here is scoring just this side, because remember, these are two different shells, even though I have this spot going over both of them. I want to score them individually. So I've just done my lines on this side, and then I did my lines on this side. Now I'm going to go back. Do that side. Let's go ahead and do this one. Yeah, I think that's it for now. That's where I want to stop. I don't want to overdo it. I just want it a little bit in different places. Alright, so this is my little glazing chart, and I wanted to make sure that I'm getting the representation that I want. So I played around with lots of different, basically I put down my core colors first, which is exactly what we have here, and then I played around with all different types of top coats. And the one that I really love right now is this Windsor Violet, as well as manganese. This little part is manganese, and mauve. Those are the ones that I like, I think, the most, that I want to play around with. And these are going to be my spots. And you can actually kind of see, I played around also with doing the scratch work. So this is kind of what it will look like. Right here, you can kind of see it. It looks like ink work, but it's actually scoring on the paper. And this is a really easy way to get nice, exact lines without putting a lot of effort, to be perfectly honest, into it. So let's go ahead and do that next. So I'm going to go ahead and prep all my colors over here. So I'm going to put mauve here. I'll put manganese in this area. And I think I'm going to put some Winsor violet in this area. Okay, I'm going to use my mop brush again. And basically what I'm going to do is start with my purple and just basically go in those areas where I scored. And for this particular area, I want to do these separate so that they look like they're on two different things. So don't paint all the way across, just do this little area. I'm going to add some deeper purple into it. And I can actually pick up some more. There we go. Pick up some manganese, put that on top. With the mauve. And what I'm doing right now is just dripping some Winsor violet into these spots that I've already created. And just letting it bloom out however it wants to. Now I'm going to do this one, but I'm going to try and leave a little bit of line between these two. Let's pick up some manganese and pull this one out a bit. I'm going to use a smaller brush to drop in some deeper Winsor violet. Yeah, I think that's good. Okay, so now I'm going to let that dry. And I'm going to pick up some dark Winsor violet. And I'm going to mix in some mauve with this. Mauve is a student grade Winsor and Cotman color, but I personally just really love it. So if you don't have that in your collection, it mixes really well with a lot of other colors. All right. So I'm going to mix in some of these purples and just add a little bit of color or glazing right over top. And I want to do a little bit of negative painting over this, where his eyes would be located. I'm going to add a little bit of Opera Rose to this to make it a brighter purple. And once again, go around this little area where the eye would be located. And I'm going to take the same color and to switch things up a bit, I'm going to take some of this green gold and add some of that on this side. I think I'm actually going to add some green gold over here too. It'll add just a little bit of different texture and color variation to our ladybug. So I'm just dripping in some paint. And I think actually I'm going to pull some of this down. I want to get some this mauve. Basically pull some of this down and pull it into this particular area. And I want to do the same thing. I'm going to use this kind of mauve green gold, which makes kind of a brown color, and glaze that over top right here. Let's pick up some of this mauve. Just like so. And now you can kind of start to see there's like scoring here, and it looks like I took a pen or something, when in reality I just cut basically little lines into the paper with that X-Acto knife. So this is a really quick way to add texture to your painting in a unique way, and also have it look more like really exact and really precise looking. Alright, so now I'm going to let this completely dry. I don't want to touch this anymore. I want to allow this completely to dry before I start moving on to the next step of what I want to do. Okay, the next thing that I want to do, this is nearly dry. I want to soften some of these edges. So I like where the spots are coming, and I like the edge that it has, but I just want to soften some of them. So what I'm doing is I'm taking just a brush with clean water, and I'm just going to pull some of this color, basically wet it and then lift it and pull it out a little bit, just so it lightens it a tiny smidge. I'm going to do that over here too. Do that here. I'm going to do it here as well. Basically, I'm just trying to lighten it a little bit and pull that color out so it's not as drastic. And then what I want to do is try and go back over these areas, this gradient color, with the colors that I had before, but make them very, very, very light. So I'm going to go in here and just lightly glaze over this. What's going to end up happening is you're actually going to pull some of that color into your spots. Let's add some yellow in this area and some green in this one. Now these are very, very light. Don't think you're adding a ton of color. I'm trying to make this as light as possible. Here's another trick for you. If you feel like you're, right here, I'm getting some spindly little lines and I personally don't want that. So I'm going to take a Q-tip and just lift up some of that color. And blend it out a little bit. So it'll look like that. And for this side, I actually really like this particular color pattern, but my dots are a bit rough. So what I'm going to do is just go over this very lightly with my mop brush and just soften those edges on this side. And then add maybe some green gold down here just to make it pop a bit more. Okay, while this is drying, I'm going to add a little bit of patterns to my little beetle's head. So what I'm going to do is mix some of my mauve with my Winsor Violet, kind of get a warmer purple. And I want to just take, this is a 00 Cotman series brush. Alright, so what I want to do is just take this small itty bitty brush and just put little dots over on this side. And slowly as I come over to this side, I'm going to make them a bit more sparse. Because usually when you have a shadow, you can see more detail. And when you're in a lighter area, you see less of that detail. Next thing I'm going to do is take this same color, same brush, and just going to do simple little lines here. Glazing right over top. And I'm going to do the same thing down at the bottom. And I think I'm going to do little lines. This is kind of where his little snout is for our ladybug. I'm going to do little lines here as well, going across. And then kind of pepper them out to be little dots. Next thing I'm going to do is take this same color and I'm just going to add a little line on the side to kind of show where the shadow would be located. So let me zoom you in a little bit so you can see better. So right here, just gonna add a little shadow right next to the shell and right underneath the leg. And I'm gonna do the same thing here. As well as here. And I think I'm going to lighten up my purple a bit because this side would have more light. And here. Okay, now I'm going to let this completely dry. Before we start adding more detail to our illustration, the next thing we're going to do is add mixed media. We can add colored pencils, we can add markers, we can add ink, we can add gouache. There's tons of different things that you can do. We can even correct some of this up right here. The thing that I love about mixed media watercolor, or sometimes referred to as modern watercolor, is if you make a quote-unquote mistake, which with watercolor that's easy to do but then hard to do at the same time. Since we're using mixed media, it's easy to correct those mistakes or even cover them up with really cool designs or effects. So that's what we're going to be doing next. So this one is 33. I'm thinking about just adding a little bit of blue on this line to make it stand out a bit and sharpen it a smidge. Put a blue there up here on this line. Maybe one here too. Maybe I should do some on my little legs just at the bottom, just to add a little bit of different color. And then let's take this one. And I'm just adding it wherever I feel like it, kind of. But basically, I added little highlights to the legs, very small. This one's actually a little too big. Right there. And, to add some different texture, let's add a little bit of this blue next to this yellow. Kind of just 3 little lines right here and on this side, and maybe a little on this side too. Yeah, just to add a bit of difference to make it look interesting. Now I have this really light pink. I could add that in some of my spots just to kind of lighten some of these up. Yeah, just along the edges. Don't have to add a lot. Just a little bit. And then maybe at the very edge where you would have a pop of highlight popping off the white background, we'll put a little highlight bouncing off line here, and we will put a highlight line right in this area as well. And I think I'm going to put one here as well. Maybe one here. Right there is just a little highlight. Alright, the last thing I'm going to do is use white gouache. This is titanium white, so this is very opaque white watercolor, or in my opinion this is more gouache, but it's considered professional watercolor. but it basically acts like gouache paint, which is very opaque watercolor paints. And what I'm going to do is just put a little bit on my plate. And with my 00 brush, I'm going to add white back into this thing. So one thing I could have done is used masking fluid, but I know a lot of beginners are really intimidated by masking fluid. So guess what? You don't have to use masking fluid. You can use white paint. It doesn't matter. So we will just go over these little eyes area. Just like so, and you can start to see it's really starting to look like a ladybug now. And I'm going to add little dots as extra pattern details. And since I'm using this with pretty much no water, I'm basically painting with this as if it's acrylic paint or white ink. I can go over my pencil lines because it's basically just a thick medium, and it will stick. I love adding dots. This is one of my favorite things to do. I love messing around with this stuff. It's so much fun. Do y'all make noises when you do little dots? Because a lot of times I do. You probably can hear Teddy snoring too, right below me. She's right at my feet. Let's add some little dots in these areas too. Just to switch stuff up a bit. And that is it. If I want to, I can actually take, let me make sure that there's nothing in this brush first. There is color in this brush. We want to make sure there's no color in this brush. And another thing I can do is actually take this white gouache and clean up some of my edges. So I'm going to clean up this side. Clean up the edge here. Let's clean this edge up. And as you can see, as long as you try and lighten up those areas, the white gouache actually goes over those really nicely. And it's like they disappear. They're not even there. That's what I love about white gouache. So this is white watercolor, but like I said earlier, it acts very similar to gouache. Why I use watercolor more than gouache is because I'm more familiar with watercolor. But to be perfectly honest, I probably paint with watercolor more similar to like it's gouache than actual true watercolor. So a lot of times people with traditional watercolor, they will build up their watercolor paintings with really light layers and then pull them into the darker stuff, whereas I like to lay my first layer with a lot of color, and that's kind of more of a gouache technique. But why don't I use gouache? Why do I use watercolor instead? Personally, I really like the way watercolor looks on the paper better than gouache. So gouache, because it is opaque, it can have a chalky appearance to it. And I like that more luminescent feel that watercolor gives you on the paper. So this is the reason why I choose to paint this particular way. So anyway, I hope you like this and you enjoyed this. If you want more tutorials similar to this I kind of did on a whim, and just to kind of see how it would do. So, and in fact, I see some more bleeding through, so I'm going to use some gouache to fix this. But if you like this type of thing, please like the video. It really does help the channel. Comment below what other, let's say for this particular one, what other insects maybe you would like for me to teach. Because insects are actually really easy to paint, as you saw, but when you get to the very end and the finished product, it looks really, really nice. And it looks like you spent a whole lot of time when in reality you just kind of painted and then stepped away real quick and let it dry, and painted and stepped away real quick and let it dry. So anyway, yeah, lots of love, y'all. Happy painting, and I will see you next time.